Thank you very much. I'm here, as I said, I co-lead the Stockholm Technology and Interaction Group with Aira Lampinen at Stockholm University, and we sort of work between HCI and the social sciences. So that's where we live. So the previous talks today really spoke to both sides of what we do. And I've been working in HCI, so human computer interaction, for a while now. And as you can see from the things on the screen, we look at how technology is used in everyday life and how we design things to change what happens in everyday life. One of the things we'd often do in HCI, and this still happens now, but it's definitely more back in the old days when I was a PhD student and the iPhone had just come out, we would do things called probes. And the probes were technologies we'd build to change how people interacted with the world. So we'd make things that changed how they navigated, for example, or experienced culture in museums or parks, or how they talked to each other. And we'd change it and try and pull things apart and make some things easy, some things more difficult, and work out what that did to what people were doing with their everyday lives. And you can see some of these things are our little robot on the top there. That's Tama. That's very non-anthropomorphic, so it's possibly the opposite end of the spectrum from Farhat. But we've also looked at things like what happens to how people interact with each other when they start wearing the Apple Watch. So this is from a study we did when that first came out as well, where we wired people up with police body cameras and had them wear an Apple Watch for a month, and then for the last 3 days they would wear these body cameras, and we saw everything and how they interacted with people. Just to see what happens and how does technology change what we do in the world, and how does it change how we sleep or how we share music and things like that. So as technology started impacting more and more bits of our lives, these splits, these frictions that we were placing into how we interacted with the world, and these things that we were making easier, started to become something else, really. We started to see that the decisions we made to make what to make easy, what to make more difficult, and what to bring to the front or hide, and who to give access to what things, really starts to impact how people interact with the world. And you start to realize that when you're impacting how people interact with the world, you're impacting how they perceive the world overall, right? Because we understand the world by how we interact with the people, with institutions, with the brands, with the technology around us. And this change caused a bit of a pushback in the HCI community overall. People noticed what was happening with things like infinite scroll and tech addiction, and how always being connected changed how people felt about their jobs, their lives, their families. And there was a overall values-based move in the whole community of how can we actually think about what we're building a bit more, how can we involve people a bit more, and how can we look at what we're doing in the light of what we want the world to be, not just what makes things better, faster, stronger. And when we look at AI and robotics, let's start to supercharge this, right? It's not only a change in how we interact with things, it's not just a medium to interact with brands or companies or people. It's starting to become a collaborator in how we mutually work together with these AI systems to produce the society we live in. But still the same problems, right? Parts of this production of the society happens through our interaction with these things. And as designer and developer has decided what to make easy, what to make more difficult, and who to have access to what. And this cute little video from Pexels, of course, nice little open source free video, still raises some of these questions, right? Is the kid who this interaction was built for, or was it for the parent? Who starts or stops these interactions? Has this kid been dancing there for 4 hours waiting for mum and dad to get the right shot? Right, that's the question. And this is all about us exercising power, and who gets to exercise power, and why these choices are being made. And that makes us think sort of how do we understand how power is distributed and where it's given and where it's taken away and who gets to use it? So looking at that and looking at that from a robotics and HRI perspective, that brought us to sort of feminist views of the world. Now, as soon as I start saying the word feminism, people start thinking about a lot of different things, and there's lots of reactions and different understandings in different contexts. But sometimes people hear the word feminism and think it's going to be about women, but it's not only about women, and really often it's not about women at all. Feminism is, of course, interested in women's issues. It's rooted historically in that. It comes from work by women around women's rights in different contexts and different areas, and that's really important. And the genealogy of feminism as to what it is today has led to a lot of ideas that become sort of a toolbox in academia. And this theoretical toolbox is a way to talk about gender, of course, but also identity, subjectivity, equality, and perhaps most importantly, power, because it is rooted in who has the power, why do they have the power, what part of society and the world allowed one group of people to have power over others, and how can we design society, and by that I mean design the technology which supports society to let us change that in a way we want to have the power distributed. So this sort of stuff is taken from this paper we did a couple of years ago, which boils down to a nice little 8 pages in an HRI paper. So I'd recommend you read it, of course, because I'm one of the authors. But it took a couple of years of hard work to boil this down. And the idea behind it is to make this idea, this set of toolbox and set of ways of thinking open to developers and designers who make robots and AI and systems in the world. And just to let us understand who has power in different situations and how we are designing these things to either make the things stay the same, make things worse, or why not make things a bit better, right? So I'm not going to go through all the things you can read the paper, but we boil it down to sort of 5 values to give us to think about, some principles when we're designing, and 10 questions to ask ourselves to make us reflect a little bit on the unconscious choices we make every day when we decide where something goes, what the defaults are. And the values to push us to think about power in a different way. I think that's the important part, about who is directly and indirectly part of the labor of what this robot is doing in the world. And to make us think about the different roles and different people who might be interacting with it or who might be affected by its interaction. Thinking carefully about the hierarchies and binaries that we see when we look at the places where we're putting these things in the world. Is it just a simple boss-worker relationship, or is there something more complicated there? What does it actually mean to say the boss has control and not the worker? And seeing how things actually are on the ground, because when people describe things and they're abstracted away, sometimes they're really quite a lot different. So, and when you're looking at the question, I think the most important one is this idea that as designers and developers, we have to think about what we're doing and why. What norms do we want to enforce? Why are they there to begin with? What do we want to enforce, and are we consciously doing that? And why can't we make things better? So that was the thing, but let's go through a worked example. Let's think about a warehouse robot. Now, a lot of robotics promises are based around the 4 Ds. That robots are going to take away the dirty, dull, dangerous, and dear jobs. And packing stuff in a warehouse is one of the ones that's quite normally seen as a dull job, right? So that's one that is open for robotic intervention. So when we think about the power dynamics there, then we maybe think about what happens when we have this power shift. We have a lot of power with the employers, right? Because these are jobs where there are generally, in most labour markets, more people willing to do the job than there are spaces available. So what happens when robots are deployed into this structure? Will it make the job less dangerous, less dull, less dirty? Spoiler alert, probably not, right? So when this happened in, I think it was 2022, there was a study on what happened to the deployment of warehouse robots in Amazon. The workers did not get a better time. They didn't have a better job after that. They had an increase in production quotas. They had reduced social interaction with their peers. They had an increase in workplace injuries because they were working only over and over again at the hard part of the job the robot couldn't do and not getting to do the easy parts of the job, which were taken away by the robot. So this really negatively impacted their working life, but productivity went up, so no one really mattered who was in power, right? So this further increased the differential in power between the workers and the employers because they were even more replaceable because less people needed. So what happens if we think that through with the values we talked about before? Well, as a starting point, one thing we want to look at is what metrics are we choosing to decide what's best? And optimizing for task performance and throughput is, of course, very important, but doesn't have to be the only metric that is used to decide success, right? One of the principles is to elevate emotion and embodiment. And that means just to remember that the people who are working with your robot or working with your AI are human beings. We have bodies. We have emotions. We feel happy or sad or cold or tired. And a lot of that is lost when the robot is equated to the human in the interaction when we're designing these things. And that idea might help us build things that give people a sense of worth or a sense of joy in their works, or might just let us make people actually be more embodied in their work, in their everyday life, because we spend a lot of time at work. And this might have prompted us to think about the systems and interactions that we're building here for this technology-assisted workforce. How does this impact what we do with other people? What about the power here? Can we start seriously examining what the addition of robots or AI does to the interwoven connections of people that make up any workplace or industry? Who has access to data and why has it actually been designed that way is one very simple question to start with. Is it because the management is paying for this system that they have the control? Or is it simply because that when you were designing it, it was easier to get middle management people into a focus group because they don't do any real work, right? That is one thing to think about. That's the plurality aspect. So one of the questions I want to ask is how can we start making these things more inclusive, more socially sustainable, and in a way that works towards social well-being? And it's hard, right? I'm not saying this is easy and you're all just doing a terrible job of not thinking about things. Of course not. These are really, really hard. This took us 2 years of 8 people meeting for a long time and a very confused technologist trying to understand what the hell was going on in most of the meetings, right? This was hard-won knowledge here. So I'm not saying this is a simple step to make, but what we can do is start looking at how can we design for these different power relations. And so just enough time to give you a little bit of what we're starting to do to see if we can actualize that. So what we're working on is we're looking at multi-language blue-collar workplaces across Sweden at the moment. So this is just starting up, and multilingual workplaces are an interesting mix of interactions, hierarchies, and power distributions. You've got people with mixed languages and mixed language abilities. And you've got hierarchies of, obviously, work, but also of informal hierarchies of people who have been here longer, who know certain things about certain systems. And then you have differing social norms also colliding in these different interactions. Now, the pictures on that side of me that you can see sort of blurred out, this is from the AI being used for translation in these workplaces, because it is used every day all over Sweden. And this is a clip that we have from one of the employees who doesn't speak Swedish or English, the boss who speaks Swedish and English, and they're trying to work out why he wasn't at work a couple of days ago. So the interaction is done face-to-face, but it's also done through AI on the phone. And it involves a lot of embodied work of moving back and forward. But it's not just the work of working with the technology. There's also a very important social interaction happening there of the boss saying, where the hell were you last Tuesday? Was it fab? Were you looking after your kids? And the guy's like, no, I was sick. And there's a lot of work done there that's beyond what's available on Google Translate, or I think this was a ChatGPT translate system. And what we're looking at, what we're trying to build is this data set over, like, we've got 4 workplaces in Sweden, a food processing company, car sales and repair, some graphic process design management. And we're looking at these to build these vignettes, these important pieces of information on how people are actually interacting through AI and how it's affecting their power relationships with their work, with their livelihood. And we're doing this not just technologically, right? So this is where we're bringing in a lot of the behavioral sciences methods which were talked about earlier. We have focused a lot on EMCA, which is a hard to pronounce thing, ethnomethodological conversation analysis, or ethnomethodological conversation analytic method. And what that means is you take moments of interaction, and these are really small. These EMCA papers can focus in on 5-10 seconds of people interacting and work out exactly how these things work. And what they do is they bring out the underlying rules and structures and norms of how we interact with each other. For example, our little robot with the eyes you saw on the first slide, that was built to embody one of the EMC principles of gaze. And there's these simple rules of how we look at each other when we interact with one another. But if I'm looking at you and I'm talking, you're supposed to look back. But if you're looking at me and I'm talking, I don't have to look, but I've got to look before it's your turn. And there are little bits of how these things are sequenced. And of course, they're not rules in any sense of the word, because as humans, we break them all the time. But when we break them meaningfully and to give information of how things are going on and how we want other people to react to our information that we are imparting. So we're using that, we're using participatory design, and then we're using that to prototype AI interventions to see what happens and how we can better support and how we can better change the culture in these situations. And the goal there is to understand how this idea of hybrid agency can be built into what we're looking for, sort of a Nordic context where well-being, inclusivity and sort of autonomy are core values of the working environment, right? So we are looking at building these little hybrid agency policies which sit on top of AI and work on modality, presence and location, and conversational context to control how it interacts, why, and when. And with that, I will suggest you read the paper and encourage you to move fast and don't break things, make things better. Thank you.